But blessed are the persecuted. Verse 22, blessed are you when men hate you, and when they exclude you and revile you and cast out your name as evil for the Son of Man's sake. Rejoice in that day and leap for joy, for indeed your reward is great in heaven, for in like manner their fathers did to the prophets. Those who refuse to embrace the ethics of the scribes and Pharisees, who are shut out of the circle of respectability, will be hated by men. They will be despised by many. But those who follow Jesus, they're going to be treated like the prophets were by unfaithful Israel. The prophets were reviled and slandered and excluded because of Messiah's sake. And Jesus says, when you are faithful to me, that happens to you as well. And this is really the key to understanding all this. It's not merely being opposed or rejected or despised by others that brings you blessedness, because sometimes you deserve to be opposed and rejected, right? Because you're wrong. You're being obnoxious. You're not doing it right. It's the opposition that is for the sake of the Son of Man. It's the opposition that comes as a result of your faithfulness. Because you're being faithful to the Son of Man, because you refuse to turn away from him and deny him and act like he's not truly God and his word is not authoritative, that will bring on you the despising of the world and the rejection of the world. And Jesus says, when that happens to you, in that day, I want you to rejoice. And you see, it's because the reason for the rejection that comes upon you, that's exactly the reason why it's a reason for rejoicing and not a reason for sorrowing. When you're opposed because of Jesus for his sake, it's not a time to mourn or to feel sorry for yourself. It's not a time for anger or resentment or bitterness. Rather, it's a time to rejoice. And not just quiet thankfulness, but exuberant celebration. The word here means leaping for joy, dancing for joy. It's the same word that's used to describe the unborn John the Baptist. Remember when Mary entered the room, she was already pregnant with Jesus, and Elizabeth says, "My son, leap for joy at your presence." That's the picture here. This is to be done not after things have quieted down and you're not in trouble anymore, but when it happens, Jesus emphasizes, in that day, I want you to rejoice. This is to be your response as soon as this kind of opprobrium falls upon you, as soon as the opposition hits you, as soon as people start doing these things to you. And all the while it continues, you're to be rejoicing, celebrating that you have the honor of being treated like the faithful prophets of old, and like Jesus himself was treated. But then Jesus turns it around and says, "But woe to you who are beloved by the world." Verse 26, "Woe to you when all men speak well of you, for so did their fathers to the false prophets. Just as opposition for your faithfulness to Messiah is an honor and will be rewarded, so it's a terrible sign when those who persecuted the prophets for their faithfulness love you." Why are they loving you? Those people who hate people who are faithful, why do they care? Why won't they oppose you? Why aren't you unpopular among that crowd? Why do they think you're a great person, a great guy? Jesus is asking that question. When they hated the prophets, they hated the faithful prophet. They loved the false prophets. Those are the people they loved. So if they're loving you, why is that? Are you imitating the false prophets? Is that you? You're compromising every time something happens so that you don't offend by faithfulness anyone around you? Woe to you if that's the way you are. That's exactly the way the false prophets were. They wanted to save themselves first of all. They didn't want to get in trouble for anything. So if the king told them to prophesy, they just said exactly what they knew he wanted to hear. They wouldn't dare be faithful to God's word because the king would get mad at them for that. And they are not about to get the king's wrath. They would rather face the wrath of God. And that's the way you are when you compromise. You're acting like the false prophets. You're seeking to save yourself. And he who seeks to save his life will lose it. You see, this was so important for the church of Luke's day to hear. He's writing for Christians who are about to face a terrible day, a terrible time, a trial, the great tribulation is the way Jesus described it. And it's essential that they understand the meaning of persecution and have the right perspective on it. If you're being faithful to Jesus, persecution and opposition is a badge of honor. Never be embarrassed for being put to shame because you're faithful to Jesus. Never